Hey guys, and welcome back to another video right here on TetraBitGaming. Normally, when you buy a game, the process is pretty simple. You open the case, plop the game into your console, and you start playing. Or nowadays, even that three-step process is simplified with just downloading games. Now, although most carts and discs are nothing special, there are a few unusual ones that have some sort of gimmick that sets them apart from the rest. As such, in this video, I will be going through my list of the most interesting, wacky, and unusual video game cartridges. Although there are a ton of wacky carts out there, and the line between game and peripheral is often blurry, for this video I will only list off carts with built-in features that can still be considered games in the traditional sense. So that means carts that are more so peripherals or accessories like the Game Boy camera or e-reader will be excluded from this list and saved for a future video. Anyways, without any further delay, let's get right to it. Here is my list of the most unusual and interesting video game cartridges. To start off this list, let's talk about some of the more tame special cartridges. The first of these are, of course, the games that have a built-in rumble feature. These carts introduced haptic feedback in the form of simple vibrations during some gameplay instances in the respective game. The rumble gimmick was used, and I guess still is used to this day, to make the player feel more immersed into the game they are playing. Now, personally, I've never really found vibrating carts or controllers all that immersive, but I guess it is kind of satisfying to feel that buzz in certain parts of a game. As far as carts go, the ones with built-in rumble features that usually come to mind are Drill Dozer for the Game Boy Advance, and the several Game Boy and Game Boy Color carts, which still needed a battery to operate. Some of the Game Boy games that had this feature include Pokemon Pinball, Ready to Rumble, and Sonic Adventure 8? I always thought these Rumble Pack Game Boy cartridges looked goofy and just not as appealing as the regular ones. The Rumble Pack cartridges then evolved into the Rumble Pack accessory for the Nintendo 64 controllers, and then eventually into standalone Rumble Packs for the Nintendo DS line of handhelds. This DS Rumble Pack is only compatible with about 50 games, even less of which were actually released outside of Japan. Although the 3DS line of Nintendo handhelds ditched the whole rumble feature, most home consoles now have rumble features built into the controller, namely the Nintendo Switch with its special HD rumble. The second of the more well-known special cartridges are those with a built-in accelerometer, which allowed for gyroscopic tilt controls. Again, around the same era as Drill Dozer, the games that I usually think of having a built-in gyroscope are Yoshi's Topsy-Turvy, or Yoshi's Universal Gravitation as it's known outside of North America, and WarioWare Twisted, which actually had a gyroscope and rumble feature. There are of course earlier games that made use of a built-in gyro sensor like Kirby Tilt and Tumble for the Game Boy Color. The concept of the gyroscoping controls in these games was pretty basic. Tilt the Game Boy and the game reacts. Like in Yoshi's Topsy-Turvy, in which you can basically control the entire aspect of gravity. Cool. I definitely prefer these gyroscope features over the rumble ones because although still a gimmick, they are usually integral to the gameplay in the games that have them built in, rather than just extra fluff. Again, like with rumble controls, the gyroscopes have also evolved and made their way into modern gaming, such as on the Wii U, 3DS, Switch, and of course, mobile games. Sure, you can just use traditional controls most of the time, but why do that when you can use motion controls and not shut up about it? Okay, so I'm gonna cheat a little bit with this next one, as it isn't a cartridge. If you thought there's no way a disc could have a gimmick too, well, you'd be wrong. This is the only type of disc gimmick that I could find, so I thought I might as well just toss it into this video as well. Anyways, at the turn of the millennia, there were two prominent cases in which certain discs were outfitted with a scratch and sniff? Yup, both FIFA 2001 and Gran Turismo 2 had versions of the game in which they could be scratched and subsequently sniffed. Scratching the label of the special FIFA 2001 disc would result in the smell of the turf on a soccer field, and the special blue pit stop Gran Turismo 2 disc would smell like gasoline, and burning tires. It sure is a mystery to me why more games didn't include this amazing immersive gimmick on their discs and cartridges. Although I already discussed games with built-in accelerometers, next up is a game so interesting and different that I think it still warrants its own spot on this list. Hoshizora Navi, which translates to Starlit Sky Navi, is a game cart that was only released in Japan that would allow players to explore the night sky with their Nintendo DS. With the cart's pre-programmed locations of objects in the sky, players could use the cart's built-in accelerometers by moving the DS around to view and locate star constellations, planets, and more. In fact, apparently the game sports star charts with 9,300 stars, planets, moons, and meteor groups. What's even more cool is that with this game, players can also view the night sky as it appeared in the past, all the way back to the year 1900. Or they could also look to the future as far as 2099. Additionally, you can also view the skyscape from various different global viewing locations. And if you're not up to date with space lingo, the game even has a nifty dictionary covering various astronomical terms. Sure, there are apps you can download now for free that do most, if not more, than this game could, but in 2009 this was still pretty revolutionary. Not to mention that it was running on a Nintendo DS. Up next is a game that I had first learned about in Nintendo's video in which he listed several games that were ahead of their time. Morita Shoji 64 is a virtual board game that came out on the N64 in April of 1998, exclusively in Japan. This sequel to the also Japanese exclusive Nintendo 64 launch title, Saikyo Habu Shogi, is known for being the only Nintendo 64 game to have online functionality. Well, at least it did while the servers were up, which wasn't for very long because the game ended up being a commercial failure. I mean, the game was nothing special. It featured the Japanese board game shogi, which is also known as Game of Generals or Japanese chess. As you can see though, the game pack itself is pretty unusual. The cartridge itself had a goofy back which housed an RJ42 modem connection port. With a cable, players could use this port to connect to a phone line to access the internet, just like we had to back in the dial-up internet era. When connected, players would be able to, of course, play shogi against other players around Japan. I know it's completely different, but the online features of this game just makes me wonder if Super Mario 64 Online could have been at all possible back then as well. I mean, it doesn't even run smoothly in the current year, so my guess is probably not.
That's a sick lost bit. I got the first one.
At number 2 is yet another Game Boy Color game. The Robopong series is a number of RPG games released in Japan for the Game Boy Color in 1998 and in North America in the year 2000. Strangely, 3 different versions were released in Japan, but only one of them was localized in North America. Like, why even give it a version name if there only is one? Anyways, just based on what you're seeing here, I know what you're probably thinking. What is that? Some sort of Pokemon knockoff? Yep. They look borderline copyright infringingly similar, play really similar, they sold in different versions, heck, even the box art looks heavily inspired by Pokemon. Like, come on now. Build 'em, collect 'em, trash 'em? The similarity to Gotta Catch 'em All is so blatantly obvious. And I guess who could blame them for wanting to cash in on the Pokemania craze of the late 90s? And this wasn't made by some small-time studio either. This game was actually developed by Hudson Soft, famous for games like Mario Party, and published by Atlas in North America. Anyways, back to the topic at hand, what sets this game apart from Pokemon and pretty much every other Game Boy Color game is the game cartridge contained an infrared panel which allowed the game to trade information with other devices that emit infrared beams, like a TV remote. This function, known as GB Kiss, who came up with that name, allowed for a gameplay feature in which players could do things like unlock chests and boost the stats of their Robopongs by blasting some IR beams at the game cart with a TV remote. I mean, the concept is pretty cool and it works somewhat decently, but could they not have implemented this in a game that wasn't Pokemon Light? The games did get a sequel in both Japan and North America, and although it didn't look anywhere near as close to Pokemon as the predecessors, just like Pokemon games tend to, it did come out in 2 versions. And the box art still makes it seem like this game was some sort of Pokemon ROM hack. And last up on this list are the games that I think definitely have the most unusual and interesting gimmick built into the carts, Boktai 1 and 2 for the Game Boy Advance. As the tagline, "The sun is in your hands" from the first game suggests, the sun plays a huge role in these games. And that's because each cartridge has a photovoltaic sensor which measures light exposure. That's right, these cartridges actually have a built-in solar panel. As I mentioned, light exposure plays an absolutely integral part in this game as it allows the player to charge up solar weapons, like the Gundel Sol, literally Gun of the Sun. This leads to a bit of a problem if sunlight is unavailable, like it is basically half of a given day. With no sunlight to power up your weapons, the game shifts to a larger focus on stealth to sneak by enemies. After entering in your time and time zone, the game can actually estimate when the sun will rise and set, and it will also even simulate the position of the sun in the game as well. I find this absolutely fascinating for a Game Boy Advance game that came out over 15 years ago. As far as the premise of the games, this Hideo Kojima produced series follows the adventures of protagonists Django and Master Otenko during an apparent apocalyptic time known as the Age of Darkness. Without getting into too much detail, basically as Django you have to avenge your father's death and kill lots of monsters along the way. I've known about this series for a while now as I was first introduced to it in the Mega Man Battle Network series. In Mega Man Battle Network 4, 5, and 6, several crossovers appear, namely with the appearance of Django and Master Otenko, as well as several of the game's battle chips. The Boktai series got another sequel eventually on the Nintendo DS in North America, in which it no longer required the solar functionality, but you could throw one of the 2 older games into the DS Game Boy Advance slot to use the light feature, I guess if you wanted to play the game in its definitive form. Even though the Boktai games are considered by many to be some of the best on the GBA, the games didn't sell all too well in North America, and as such the games are rather hard to come by and usually command somewhat high of a price. I guess that makes the Boktai series sort of a hidden gem on the Game Boy Advance. So if you're constantly being told to go outside more often, this is definitely the series of games for you. And there you have it, my list of the most unusual and interesting video game cartridges and disc. I hope you enjoyed, and I hope you learned something new. I know there are probably some more game carts with cool features built in that I missed, so if you know of any, I'd love to hear about them in the comments below. Also, please let me know if you would like me to go into more details with some of these games in a future video. As always, if you're new here and enjoyed the video, be sure to check out more of my lists like this video where Nintendo and I go over the most useless Nintendo peripherals by clicking or tapping on the card right here. And if you would like to stay even more up to date with me and the channel, be sure to subscribe here and also follow me over on my other social media things, which will all be linked in the description below. But as always guys, thank you all so much for watching today and for all of your amazing support. And I will see you in a bit.